Good evening, dear participants. I'm pleased to welcome you to this special webinar. My name is Marina Khachatran. I'm the head of the Educational Department of the AGBU Armenian Virtual College, and I will be happy to moderate this meeting tonight. Today, we're continuing our educational and at the same time very emotional journey, touching on a topic that is not only history, but also memory, responsibility, and an important part of identity. Well, before we begin, a few quick technical notes. Please note that the webinar is being recorded so that those who were unable to join us today will have the opportunity to watch it at a later time. Simultaneous interpretation into English will be available during the webinar. To activate it, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. Click on the interpretation button, select English, and disable the original language button. Don't forget it. To ensure the best sound quality, all participants' microphones are currently muted. You will have the opportunity to ask questions in two ways. You can use the raise hand tool, and we will gladly give you the floor, or you can write your questions in the chat, and we will read them during the Q&A session. Thank you. Recently, we have explored many interesting topics that have brought us all together on this platform. Although all of our participants come from different countries around the world and have different interests, we are united by one common goal, our rich cultural and historical heritage. This is precisely the mission for which the Armenian Virtual College was created. Unite Armenians around the world and people interested in Armenian culture, history, and language. One of our most active and beloved initiatives is the AVC Learning Zone. It's a cultural environment that has already brought together thousands of people from different corners of the world. Here we not only learn, but also discuss, analyze, and even share our own stories and rethink our past and the present. Over the past few months, we have studied and discussed many interesting topics together. On your screen, you can see that we celebrated Arno Babajanyan's 105th birthday, studied numerous materials dedicated to his eternal legacy. Among these topics, our reflection on the Armenian Genocide stands out, within the framework of which we took a virtual tour of the Armenian Genocide Museum and the Memorial Complex and got acquainted with the family stories of participants of Armenian Virtual College's Reliving My Story project. We have discovered the cultural richness of Armenian holidays, festivals, and we have had over 60 other discussions which are available on our educational platform. So you can go to the educational platform and familiarize yourself with different topics. This evening of April 26 will be dedicated to a crucial page in our history, to the great humanitarian mission that AGBU carried out during war. Since its founding in 1906, the AGBU's mission has remained unchanged: to strengthen Armenian identity and to ensure the well-being of our people. And now we would like to show a short video that summarizes the 120-year history of AGBU. Let's watch it. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the founding president of AVC and vice president of the AGBU, Dr. Yervan Zorian. Thank you, Marina. Thank you all. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you here today. We have decided to create a series dedicated to AGBU. As you know, this year we are celebrating 120th anniversary of AGBU, and so we decided to address the activity of AGBU, its goals, and AGBU has been able to adjust its activity to the current needs of the Armenian people. As you could see in the video, AGBU has done a lot of activity on Armenian land to help the Armenian intellectual, to help the Armenian worker, to ensure their well-being. And starting from 1915, particularly from the end of 1915, because many Armenians spread around the world, AGBU changed its activity shifted its activity to the diaspora, including educational activities. And during this series, we will talk about different types of activities, education-related, culture-related. Particularly today, we are going to focus on World War I and the Armenian Genocide that happened during World War I, and what AGBU did in this period. Today, we are very happy to have Mr. Kevorkian with us. He is one of the most important experts on AGBU history and Armenian Genocide history. So he's going to cover both topics today, and you may be aware that the two volumes that Mr. Kevorkian has issued on the occasion of the 100th anniversary are currently available on the website of the Armenian Virtual College. So you can follow the link of the website and get the books. The floor is yours, Mr. Kevorkian. Thank you, Yervan. If you allow me, I will start. I will speak around about 30 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session as it has been planned. Well, first of all, I would like to mention that I did not write these two volumes alone. I did it with Vahet Ashtian. He is currently responsible for Department of Armenian Studies in University of Jean Jose. So it was a book co-authored by us. It's been exactly 20 years since this volume was published. Back then there was a question, well, there was a project related to the 100th anniversary. This project entailed writing the book. And I told Mr. Kevorkian that if they want a golden manuscript, then I'm not the person they need. But he wanted to engage a historian who knew this 100 years of history. In 1906, there was a specific situation. It was Abdul Hamid era, and many intellectuals and political figures. So I was saying that in this context, many people in the Ottoman Empire, and of course the best example is Grigor Zorab, they were forced to leave Constantinople and move to Paris. So this is basically the main indicator showing what situation there was there. And the main project that Boros Nubar and Yerba Agadon had, and these are two important names that are often ignored in history. You know what they did? Their main project was agricultural development in the Armenian provinces of the Ottoman Empire, so agronomy and so on. So Agaton was an agronomy architect, and Boros Nubar had actually designed a tractor. He was also an architect, an engineer, sorry, an engineer. He had attended École Centrale, one of the most important school of engineers in France. And so there was the basic objective was economic in nature, and the main objective was modernize and develop agriculture in Armenian villages. That's how AGBU started. And in 3 years, main changes, a lot of changes took place. And the main change that directed the shift of activity of AGBU was the charters that made the union to also engage orphanages in their activities, that is, shift their activity to more of a humanitarian activity. The second point that they had planned to do was engaging in the educational field. Until 1908, so even during the tenure of Abdul Hamid, it was possible to gradually enhance the educational network. I have to say that AGBU was not the only organization in the world, and the Patriarchate of Constantinople was also very active. And under the Patriarchate of Constantinople, we can assume the whole Armenian nation. Yes. So before the war, around 2,000 schools were supplied by the Patriarchate, and around 150,000 school children of different levels, of different ages, and students were supported by the Patriarchate. And the Silesian Charter of 1909 was a bit of an obstacle, but at the same time, we entered into a new process. The Armenians, to some extent, regained certain rights within Ottoman Empire. For instance, there was certain cooperation between young Turks with the Young Turks until the World War I. So initially, the main goal was to create the Ottomanness. That is, create citizens which would have the same rights. That is, the ruling party, of course, was based on Islam, and the non-ruling party, which non-ruling side, which were mostly the Christians. So basically, they did not enjoy the same rights. The Muslims and Christians did not enjoy the same rights, and their goal was to safeguard equality, equal rights within the Ottoman Empire. And this situation remained the same until World War One. And as I mentioned, the AGBU was engaged both in agricultural development activity and at the same time AGBU had contributions and made financial investments in educational activity together with the Patriarchate of Constantinople. But starting 1912, a third factor came into place, which was again related to charity field. So AGBU and particularly Pogos Nubar entered the political arena. What do I want to say with this? There was a project to improve the overall condition of Armenians within the Ottoman Empire. And to serve this purpose, Pogos Nubar turned to Georg V, Catholicos, Patriarch. He came to Paris and created an institution, an establishment, which had the aim of cooperating with the Patriarchate and convincing the European powers to support reform in Armenian provinces, to enhance the well-being of the population, to have a mixed group among police officers, that is, ensure that the Christians also can serve as police officers. And the final point that is very important, the Hamidian squadrons, which were informal groups which were created during Abdul Hamid era, and they were engaged in undermining the well-being of the Armenian population. So the aim was to put pressure on these groups and eliminate them as such. And to advance this, in advancing this agenda, Bogos Nubar was not alone. Yervan Dağadon was also engaged. And I can say that throughout 2 years, the main activities of AGBU were focused on this so-called political/humanitarian project. Of course, Pogos Nubar was we can say a political figure, and he had a lot of links and acquaintances among high-ranking officials. And he was in Paris and in England, where he went a few times. He was able to convince them to put pressure on Young Turks so that they carry out these reforms in Armenian provinces. And so they basically did not start, but even continued this Armenophilic movement. This movement had started at the end of the 19th century, but he gave a new impetus to it. And in Brussels, an Armenian organization was established where high-ranking politicians and intellectuals were engaged. They came to Brussels for this event. So why I'm telling this story, to show you that he was a very organized person and he had the capacity to carry out this activity. And he had also close ties with the patriarch, Zaven Deryaryan. He was the patriarch of Constantinople, and whose correspondence with Bogos Nubar shows how close the cooperation between them was. And the third person who was actively engaged in this project and in this activity was Grigor Zorab, who was an advocate, a lawyer, who had, as I mentioned, had been forced to move to Paris. And indeed, these reforms, as you know, when the war started, these reforms were halted. They were stopped, and one of the responsible persons had already gone to reach Van, but when the war started, he was pulled back. He was Norwegian, and the whole project was suspended when the war started. Of course, we all know about the genocide. I just want to mention that when Bogos Nubar finished with these reform-related negotiations, he went back to Cairo, where he lived. And in 1915, when the genocide started, he returned to Paris and started to work on new projects. At the beginning of 1916, he was able to reach an agreement with the English and the French to ensure that an Armenian Legion is created. I can say that it was of a political nature. It's clear that this legion, whose main core were the survivors of Musadak, you know the story how they were saved by French boats. These were 4,084 people who were sent from Musadak to Egypt. Throughout the last years of the war, I mean 1917, 1918, the Union was focused on creating the first Armenian army in cooperation with the English and the French. But officially, this was under French leadership, and their training was carried out by French officers, military officers. I don't have much time, so I have to cut some of my speech. At the end of the war, this political process continued. If I start about talking about this, I may talk 2.5 hours. Hence, I want to speak about the humanitarian projects which were established by the end of the war. The first main activity was carried out in Syrian, Mesopotamia, Palestine area until the Red Sea area. where there were Armenian survivors, different types of survivors from different places. A small amount lived in some Jordan villages, but the main group of survivors were subdivided into two groups. One group was young women who had been so-called married to their families' perpetrators. And they had also had children with the perpetrators. And the second subgroup were children who were so-called had been adopted by some Bedouin groups or families from certain cities, both Muslim families and Christian families. Overall, I can say that we can call these women prisoners, captives, because they were married to these people just to get a piece of bread. And so, as I mentioned, these armed groups were created, and the center in Cairo organized the work in cooperation with British authorities, moving little by little towards the north. To fight against the Fourth Corps of the Ottoman Army. And this, every time the English would advance towards the north, these groups would follow them. And who organized these groups? These were the Armenian servicemen of the Fourth Army, who some of whom had been caught by the English or had deserted their posts and had joined the English. So these armed groups comprised around 20 people each. They would there was one principle around the activity of these groups. The English had asked them to not use their weapons and instead rather convince the Bedouins that they should let these women and children go without using their weapons. So in a nutshell, we can say this principle was used. One person, one goal. So they were trying to convince by giving gold instead of using their weapons, because the Bedouins, of course, were also armed. And there is one person who is very important. I think his generation is now living in California, the Marian family, who participated in the activity of these groups. They had photos showing how they took back the children and women. So two main institutions were created based on this activity. The first institution, of course, were orphanages. And the second establishment institution were shelters for young women. where they tried to do certain to provide psychological support to these women, so-called to do psychoanalysis with them to improve their mental health situation, which was not an easy job to do. To be able to measure the activity that was carried out, I want to say that basically there were women who stayed in the shelters for a few weeks. Some of them returned to their Bedouin families because very often they had been forced to leave behind their children, which they had with this Bedouin families or their perpetrators. Other women stayed basically in these shelters. And when we were writing with Vahet Ashjan about these developments, these events, we were basically also preparing individual information about them, their medical condition, etc. At the end, we just decided to give the names of these persons, and that's it. No other additional information. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of families which have women who have gone through this ordeal. I want to mention one important thing about the orphanages. Based on the decision of Pogos Nubar, AGBU started to cooperate with Relief Relief, an American organization. So they signed an agreement with them, with Notice Relief. We should know that this American organization was a very powerful organization. They were able to collect large amounts of money within the United States to help the activity of the orphanages. There was a group called Evangelique, about which you may know. So this group sent missionary groups to the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, particularly our Armenian provinces. And they had a major role in creating the Armenian elite. This is another story. And basically, we can say that the spiritual leader of this organization, of the charity organization, was the U.S. president. And within the framework of their activity of this organization, a film was created, and Notice Relief and the AGBU had major investment in creating this film. The main goal of the production of this film was to provide information about the genocide and also to stimulate and give impetus to the fundraising activity. And let's go back to the issue of what agreement they reached. Basically, Notice Relief and AGBU provided equal contributions, that is 1-to-1, yes? And for instance, if AGBU came up with an initiative, the American organization would provide an equal amount of money and vice versa. So the financial share was equal. and mostly the survivor children of the genocide, orphans, were located in three regions mostly. The first one was the Caucasus. The main orphanage in Caucasus was located in Gyumri. Some of you have seen a photo where there were 18,000 children in a field in Gyumri. This activity was coordinated by Norris Relief. And as for AGBU, AGBU cooperated with the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem, where Armenian children, both girls and boys, were placed in an orphanage called Vaspurakan, around 850 girls and boys. Another group of children were placed in Surkhaj Monastery, which belongs to Orthodox Greeks. So younger, around again 850 younger children were placed there. They had been transported by ships or trains. And at the end of the war, these children were transported to Jerusalem. And these orphanages had a few years of lifespan. Mostly they would keep children until they were 15 or 16 years old. And there was a so-called Melkonian college, which until now is located in south of Nicosia, Cyprus, in the Greek part. And for dozens of years, they would teach arts and crafts, shoemaking, sewing to these children from orphanages, because the leadership of AGBU were concerned that they wanted children who would leave the orphanages to have certain skills to be able to earn money for their living. And I can just bring a few examples. During a few weddings, basically the AGBU leaders were godfathers during these weddings. So a lot of work was carried out to ensure recovery and rehabilitation of the survivors of the genocide. How much time do I have? Well, we could hear you for a long time, but well, I also want to speak a little bit about the post-war era. I forgot to mention one thing. I spoke about the orphanage in Gyumri, but most of them were survivors were located in Syria, Lebanon, and one part was under the leadership of AGBU, the other under the American organization, and there was also a prominent orphanage in Antilles, which in the end was gifted to the Catholicate of Antilles. It's until now it's there. I think there is no point in providing additional comments here. And the third group And it was under the leadership of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. There were around 15 orphanages around Constantinople under the leadership of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And when the Kemalists entered the city, Zaven Patriarch was advised to leave the city, and the orphans also took the path of displacement, and many of them were transported to Corfu, to Greece. The most important thing refers to Armenia. From 1918 until the end of 1920, even beginning of 1921, when Armenia had become an independent country and it was under pressure, it was forced to become part of the Soviet Union, and I have written a book on this topic 2 years ago, explaining how Kemalists and young Turks came to certain agreements with Bolsheviks. So both put pressure on Armenia to end the short-lived independence of Armenia. So during these events, there was a horrific humanitarian situation. Well, one direction of humanitarian aid was in Greece. You know that the Greek also were experiencing horrific humanitarian situation, and back then Greece was not able to keep hundreds of thousands of survivors, and so they asked the Armenians to move the Armenian survivors to Armenia. And this group was moved to Armenia. Until now, they have villages here. And when the Soviet era started, these movements became more difficult. And in 1937, another group from Greece moved to Soviet Armenia. And there was also a similar issue in Syria and Lebanon. The French tried to help here. The AGBU attempted to cooperate with the members of the Soviet political party, and certain projects like medical projects, agricultural projects. I just want to bring one example. There is an eye center in Armenia, ophthalmological center in Armenia, which was created by Pogos Nubar. And until 1930s, to some extent, there was some cooperation, and if I'm not mistaken, AGBU representative made a visit to Yerevan in this period, and the Bolsheviks did not cooperate, and in 1930s, cooperation between the Bolsheviks and the AGBU basically was suspended. And you know that Galus Gulbenkian, it was in this period, became the head of the AGBU. Galus Gulbenkian did not speak Armenian, but he was a great organizer, and he had a lot of skill in working with political figures. And Gulbenkian and AGBU realized that the Soviet Union was already closed for them. The doors of the Soviet Union were blocked, and they started to think how they can ensure that Armenians in Syria and Lebanon get established in these countries. A few words about them. Particularly when it comes to Aleppo and Beirut. At the beginning of 1920s, people lived in the camps in Beirut, particularly in Mar Mikhael and Burchamut. These were basically swamps, and dozens of people died on a daily basis from different diseases because this was a swamp area and they lived in camps. In French, they say bidonville. Camps are called bidonville. These were basically dilapidated houses. Made of sheet metal. And Gulbenkian basically had a mansion, a castle. He invited the International Red Cross, head of the International Red Cross Society, and the High Commissioner of the High Commissar of France. He invited them to his castle, to his mansion, and reached an agreement with them on establishing new districts for Armenians in Aleppo and Beirut particularly. In 3 years, for instance, I will bring the example of Beirut. They created a district called Normarash. These were low-rise buildings on a hillside. And this is how they ensured that Armenians remain permanently around Burchamut. The same happened in Suleimani district, which is located in Aleppo, which until the recent war was mostly populated by Armenians. There were Armenian schools, colleges, and so hope you have made a general formed a general picture about the situation back then and the activity. It's actually very difficult to tell the story of an organization without providing the context. So hopefully I was able to convey this story with my poor Armenian. I'm a French Armenian. Please be tolerant towards my knowledge of Armenian. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you for these beautiful stories. Once again, I would like to remind everyone that the volumes are the books by Mr. Kevorkian are on our website. And now it's time to ask questions. If you have any questions, you can raise your hands and we will give you the floor. If you don't want to ask your questions on the microphone, you can write them in the chat box. So I will read the questions. I will read the shortest question first. Do you plan to publish the third volume on AGBU? Well, probably Mr. Zorian is aware that there is a focal person to advance this plan. We have had a meeting, so hopefully we will succeed. It's you have to read the history for 20 years to fully master it, so hopefully we will manage. The third volume will mostly cover the modern era. In 2006, I tried to collect the data of the recent dozens of years, but I didn't manage. I didn't succeed. For instance, I found a few documents. There was a figure who lived in Detroit, Azadian. His surname was Azadian. So Mr. Azadian had a few important documents which really helped me to understand what projects there are back then, what projects there are in the 1970s, for instance. Mostly in 1970s, the projects entailed creating schools not only in Beirut, but also in Uruguay, California, Argentina, Canada, and so on and so forth. And during Alek Manukyan's tenure, the mainly activity was carried out in the educational sector. And of course, during the earthquake, important efforts were made. And the main figure here was Louis Simon. Fortunately, the Yerevan office had kept all the archives. I had the opportunity to look at these documents and to give some general idea about the strategy of the Union of AGBU. And in the following years, my main source was the interview with Per Sedragyan. I had a 2-hour interview with him, and based on his interview, I made a synthesis of information and get some outcome, but it's not an easy job, not at all. Yes, I also want to reiterate that we are making efforts for the third volume. Well, focusing on the recent 20 years. So mostly, yeah, we will have the third volume in a few years. Next question. Mr. Kevorkian already mentioned about the civil wars taking place in Lebanon and that took place in Lebanon and Syria. Also, ethnic cleansing was being carried out. I remember that Armenians were doing fundraising to help Syrian Armenians resettle to Armenia. But the Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh war has kind of overshadowed the situation in Syria. What is the situation in Syria now? Are there any Armenians there? I don't have much information, frankly speaking. I have simply some acquaintances who recently left Aleppo. It's these people who gave us some information. To my knowledge, there are maximum 20,000 people in Aleppo. Taking into account that imagine that in 2011 there were more than 80,000 Armenians there. Now it's impossible to give accurate information, but some of them moved to Armenia, others moved to other countries of the world. I think Canada has a big population of Syrian Armenians, maybe also the United States, Australia. Particularly Canada hosted a lot of Syrian Armenians, and of course Canadians, we know that they prefer to accept more Christian population. And as of people of Aleppo in Yerevan, they basically created a cultural revolution in Armenia. They, in terms of food, in terms of introducing their culture. So basically, they enriched the cultural life in Yerevan. And I think that they were able to integrate and assimilate to the Armenian life. But I can't say more than this. We have a question from Christine. Christine, the floor is yours. Me? Me?
Yes, Christine.
Oh, hello, Raymond.
Oh.
Okay. I noticed Nor Marash as like New Marash, right?
Yeah.
And I wondered, was that a common practice that because in Greece it was very common for the refugees to create a whole new community and name it new, the same town that they were from but I didn't know that was the case with Armenians. So is Nor Marash a singular example, or were there other cases where they named the town after, like they created a new settlement and named it after their old town?
Oh, okay. Alors, I speak about Nor Marash, but is not in Greece, is in Beirut, okay?
Yes.
In the area of Burchamut. Yes. And for the Greece, we have very important documentation about Armenian refugee, and you know, of course, the work of Hervé Georgelin about Smyrna. Voilà.
Yeah, but in Lebanon, Syria, did they ever name? Was there like a Nor Van?
Yes.
Or Nor...
We have Nor Marash, Nor Harpert, and the same in Yerevan area. You have Nor Marash. You have Zeytun, Nor Zeytun.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Bon.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Celine Guletian. Hello. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. I can ask my question either in English or French. Could you Ask it in English.
So it's about just one thing. I'm not sure I understood correctly when you spoke about the Near East relief. You mentioned that AGBU also participated in the funding of the film, Aurora's film, Ravished Armenia. And this is something I didn't know, so I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. Did AGBU also finance the production of the film, the Hollywood film, with Aurora Mardiganian?
Okay.
And if it's the case, is there any chance that in the archives of AGBU we may find a copy of the film that is, as you know, lost to this day?
Alors, je vais dire en français, d'accord? C'est Richard Keloyan qui a retrouvé, vous savez, qui était de San Francisco. C'est lui qui a retrouvé les 20 minutes de film dont on dispose aujourd'hui. Et c'est lui qui m'a rapporté ça. Voilà. J'ai pas vu d'archives, mais il a même fait un petit livre. C'était lui qui était le mieux informé sur les conditions de création du film. J'ai pas plus de détails.
D'accord. Et comment s'appelle-t-il exactement? Koloyan?
Oui, il est décédé maintenant. Je pense que Yervant a dû le connaître à San Francisco.
Oui,
voilà, oui.
Vous le connaissez.
Ok, ben on pourra peut-être suivre autrement.
Then could you help us with translation? So the film Aurora, dedicated to Aurora Mardiganian, which was produced in 1919, as it was mentioned that AGBU also had a certain contribution. So not only the Near East relief, but also AGBU participated in terms of financing the film. And it was mentioned that Mr. Keloyan found 20 minutes of the film. He doesn't have the full film. And he also reiterated that AGBU participated financially in the production of this film. And I also can add that Near East relief ended in the following way. The America started to work towards their domestic issues rather than foreign issues, and that's when the Near East relief was closed and their activity was transferred to AGBU and the Patriarchate. In 1931, the Near East relief was closed. So, what information do you have about it? How it was, how this organization was closed, and what happened in other places? Well, my information is as follows. When the Catholic state of Antiochus was created, all the Middle East schools were, it was decided that AGBU would not take leadership. So every year, AGBU would provide material, financial support to the schools. That was the main policy. And so they went from school to identify their needs. As for the Near East relief, frankly speaking, I don't have much information about the history of its closing. I just know that Near East Relief's old archives are located in the Rockefeller building in New Jersey. I haven't been there, But it would be great to provide a fellowship to a student who would go to and study this archive. I think it's a good idea. A historian should work on this material. A few years ago, I met a person who actually said he's from the Near East Relief Foundation. So it basically still exists. I don't know if it was closed and reopened or it never closed. I don't have exact information. Maybe in the recent 2 years it was closed, but it was quite active for some years in African countries. But they left Middle East. In 1930s, they left Middle East. Thank you. We have a question. I want to read it out. After the genocide, the issue of returning Armenian women and children are presented as heroic stories, but it's not only about saving them. There were a lot of stories of transferring them to other families, forcefully changing their religions, and so on. Currently, among people in Turkey now who identify themselves as Turks, they are now looking for their Armenian roots. And I think that the story has never ended. So are these belated searches, can they be considered as responses to cut out stories of families? And is it possible to say that AGBU is also trying to find traces of lost connections? There are actually 5-6 questions, not one question here. As for the Islamized survivors in Turkey, there are 2 groups there, even more than 2 groups. The first group are children who were not returned by Kurdish Turkish families, so we have a more or less exact number. There were 1,600 children, like 1,660,000 orphans by the end of the war. And out of this, 93,000 orphans were returned by the joint efforts of AGBU and the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And it's this 93,000 children that were placed in orphanages. The rest, you may remember, a few years ago, there was I think of Turkish women, including Fethiye Çetin. So they are from this group, the second group. There is another group which is like families who were Islamized, and they are the most complicated group. There is a person called Davide Sachian. He was a former CNN journalist who currently lives in Italy. He has written a very important book. It was written in English. It's called The Secret Armenians, Hidden Armenians. And he mostly refers to these families who were Islamized. How this happened? There was a law that these families were mostly craftsmen, and the Turkish army wanted to keep them. For instance, carpenters, other craftsmen were very important for them, or pharmacists. These specialists were much needed by the population of Turkey and the military of Turkey. They mostly were settled in two places. One was Dersim region, and the second was Sasun region. And Avedi Sajan's work is very much focused on these two regions. And he actually provides a very interesting account. Those who were settled in Dersim, they had officially changed their religion, and they were not Sunni. They entered the group of Alevis. And so basically, they moved from being one minority to being another minority to save themselves. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. I cannot give any figures, any numbers. Mr. Avedis has also worked on the Hamshen topic, on their language. So he provides an account of a person who is nationalist, and the other accepts that he's Armenian by origin, and they are cousins. Scientific studies and DNA studies show, and basically recently Turkish specialists have also published the data that around 80% of the population are this former populations who lived in the Ottoman Empire. Populations or have either been Turkified, we can call it Turkification or Islamization. But I don't think we should politicize this issue. There is no sense in politicizing this issue now. We just know that there are quite many Turkish families whose DNA shows former populations. The best example is Schnorr Patriarch's family. The patriarch died at the end of 80s. He was an exceptional patriarch in Constantinople, and he worked for dozens of years. And he moved Islamized and non-Islamized Armenians to Constantinople, helped them get admitted to Armenian schools where they would learn Armenian. So Snork Patriarch did this personally, imagine. He was an orphan. He was raised in an orphanage, but later he learned that his mother had survived and had married a Turkish clergyman. And what happened one day? Schnorr Patriarch was the Armenians' patriarch, and And his little brother was Shahu Islam of Turkey. So this shows what situation there is in Turkey. And Hrant Dink, in his Agos newspaper, had mentioned that it's simply impossible to create such history. So this is what Turkish history is and life is about. Allow me to ask another question, because we have a lot of with the efforts of Near East relief organizations, some orphans were transported to the United States. Do you have any information about their fate? Were any efforts made to ensure the links and connections of these children with the Armenian community? And what efforts were made to ensure that these orphans reunite with their families? Basically, Near East Relief did not move children orphans to the United States because they were children. It was impossible. But those children who left the orphanages, there were a lot of means to establish themselves somewhere, to start new lives. And some of the orphans basically tried to establish themselves in Turkey, to move to their homeland, which basically was a failure because Mustafa Kemal's regime basically ended Young Turks' activities, brought it to an end. And there is some information about the Armenian identity, the language. Yes, it's correct that children also learned English in these orphanages, but their main language of communication was Armenian. And most of the leaders of orphanages who were Americans or from Scandinavian countries, they were Armenian speaking because they came from missionaries' families. So these missionaries had been born in Sebastia, in Kharbert, or other places, so they were Armenian speaking. And they spoke both Armenian and Turkish. And from this perspective, there was no issue. So the children who generally left the orphanage, the institution, when they were 16 years old, so mainly they moved in two directions. One was France. So if there were any family ties, family connections, and I forgot to say one thing, if there were basically lists where it was mentioned, this person is looking for this person, that person is looking for that person, and so on and so forth. And in orphanages, the personal envelopes of children also included names of the relatives. And the Armenian Red Cross also participated in the search activities, and the media also had a major role here. So the whole fourth page of the media was dedicated to this list and search for relatives. There is a historiographer, her name is Anna Ovanesyan, she's a French Armenian. She worked for the UN. There is a group in Jordan that has an interesting name, Armani. So she approached them, started to talk to them, and heard that this Ashiret has a unique peculiarity. The mothers are Armenian. They are, and all are from Arabkish. And this Ashiret is so-called elite in nature, both in terms of the food they cook. So basically, they brought a lot of innovations to these Bedouin circles. And recently, we got informed that an Armenian doctor talked to these women from Arabkish, and one of the brothers was in Boston, and the granddaughter of this woman is telling us that this woman got an invitation to go to the United States by her brother. And when she went, she was all covered up. And 6 months later, she returned, and her granddaughter says that she had a so this head with vivid colors and a shirt with floral patterns. While when she was going to the United States, she was wearing black clothes. So she returned a totally different person. So this is the reality. And during the 100th anniversary, there were also leaders of Ashirats. How was this point at the left of Euphrates called Kabur? So Kabur starts at Russell Line, and there is a part where it flows into Euphrates, and this, when it comes to this Kabur Valley, hundreds of families from Erzurum were established in this valley, and they became Bedouins. And on the occasion of the 100th anniversary, they were invited to Aleppo to participate in certain events. We can bring hundreds of such examples. I'm a bit tired. If possible, let's sum up. We don't have any more questions. I just want to read a message of gratitude by one of our students. I want to thank the AGBU and particularly Armenian Virtual College and our guest for sharing the truth about the genocide and the activity of AGBU. And I would like to thank AGBU for being an important part of Armenian history. In Croatia, we have a Syrian Armenian family from Aleppo, whose grandmother and grandfather were from the orphanages of Aleppo. My name is Eva Kirchmeier. I'm learning Armenian. And I am deputy chairman of the Croatian community. We are proud of you, Eva, and thank you for being with us. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Dr. Kevorkian. We can listen to you endlessly. I don't understand French, unfortunately, but I have listened to all your videos in French. I have enjoyed your voice. I have enjoyed your interpretations of history. Thank you very much. And hopefully we will have the honor of hosting you in our virtual community. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I would like to also greet Christine. Thank you all. You can follow our pages and read materials that we have published for you and for you only. Thank you, and peace to all of us. Thank you.